This supernatural creature has several names, 3 of which are co-walker, joint eater, or doppelganger, depending on its origin. What they all have in common is they appear to be you. The consequences of meeting yourself also depends on the name, or rather which variation of the legend you've encountered. While none of the above are considered congenial company, there exists another variation, which we'll get to later, that is on a very different level. Trust me, that's the one you really do not want to meet. We'll start with the co-walker of the Scottish Highlands. The folklorist and Reverend Robert Kirk considered them one of the fairy folk, and that seems to be the consensus. This type was also referred to as a joint eater due to its habit of taking the form of a particular human, alive or dead, and helping itself at funeral feasts. In some accounts, they were believed to form an attachment to one person and absorb the nutrition of anything that person ate, so he or she would get no virtue out of it and starve no matter how much they ate. Also, while they did appear in the same form as the person affected, that person would likely never see them. Only those people possessing the sight, the ability to perceive the fairy and spirit world, were believed to be able to see and recognize them for what they were. Since these seers could reveal the co-walker and give the game away, seers had to be careful. They often refused to eat at such gatherings for fear the co-walker would try to silence them by poison. The doppelganger is the German version of the co-walker, and its name can be translated as duplicate traveler. While it can be, and often was an omen of death, it could also serve the relatively benign function of a warning of impending bad fortune. Whether the doppelganger merely heralds misfortune or causes it is open for debate. In either case, suddenly meeting yourself on the street is a bad thing and is best avoided. Things get a little more complicated when we turn to the subject of wafts, and wraiths. By some accounts, these are terms for the same creature, traditionally haunting the blood-soaked border country between England and Scotland. The exception was the wraith, which could appear anywhere. Wraiths were also an exception in another important way, which we'll get to in a moment. Wafts and wafts probably were the same creature, and almost always an omen of impending death. If you happen to meet yourself in Yorkshire, Cumberland, or Northumberland, then prepare to have your ticket punched. Well, maybe not. True, there are many tales of fatal meetings with a waff. Yet there is at least one account, by William Henderson in his Folklore of the Northern Counties 1866, of a person who survived. Supposedly this gentleman met his waff in a small shop in Whitby town. Rather than cowering in fear, he gave the creature a stern lecture and sent it packing. Afterward, he lived on happily for a number of years, and the waff never returned. If you ever find yourself in that situation, I'd say it's worth a try. To further complicate matters, in at least 2 accounts in Henderson's book, a waff is credited with actually saving the life of the person whose appearance they copied. Granted, it's unclear in context whether they did so by intent or simple accident. Regardless, in the end, both supposed victims escaped danger solely due to the waff's intervention. The wraith, on the other hand, is a different matter. An encounter with a wraith seldom turns out well. There's a tradition from the 1600s that at least 2 and possibly 3 of the first Earl of Holland's daughters were taken by wraiths. The story is that Lady Diana Rich, the youngest, was walking in their garden when she was suddenly confronted by a mirror image of herself. The unfortunate girl succumbed to smallpox soon after. Her elder sister, Lady Isabel Then, met a similar fate, and in some accounts the wraiths took a third sister as well. Why the wraiths chose to grace the Earl's family with their presence is unknown, though one could speculate that he must have managed to badly offend someone in the fairy realm. The accounts are silent on that matter, and no one knows for certain. A royalist, he himself was executed during the English Civil War. It may have just been a run of extraordinarily bad luck. As dangerous as co-walkers, doppelgangers, wafts, and wraiths could be, none of them compares to the creature called a fetch. This is the one I mentioned at the start, and is especially nasty, and for a very specific reason. In some accounts, the fetch is just another name for, and no different from a waff or wraith, but another tradition suggests a more chilling reality. In this version, they are referred to as ghosts of the living, since they always appear, not as a solid twin, but as a spectral, ghostly version of the person who meets one. Also, those folk who, like the seers mentioned earlier, had the ability to see into the spirit realm could also see the fetches of other people, and thus knew who was going to pass away in the coming year. That's the heart of it. to meet your own fetch was to be doomed. Period. No exceptions. What's strongly implied in this take is the fetch is not some fey creature merely copying the victim's likeness. In a very real sense, the fetch is the person, or rather their own soul, which, unknown to them, has already left their body. Technically, anyone who sees their own fetch is already dead. They just didn't know it yet. And on that cheerful thought, see you next time.